Throughout the 20th century, there were many military conflicts. Some of these conflicts resulted in glorious military success, while others resulted in crushing defeats. In this video, I'll be talking about the worst military blunders of the 20th century. The first blunder I'll be talking about is the Bay of Pigs invasion. The Bay of Pigs invasion was ranked the 10th worst military blunder because it was one of the biggest failures of the Cold War. The Bay of Pigs invasion was an attempted invasion of Cuba by a group of Cuban exiles that were both trained and supported by the US. The goal of this invasion was to overthrow Fidel Castro because he was viewed as a threat due to his friendly relationship with the USSR and the fact that Cuba is very close to the US. This invasion was planned by the CIA, where 1,400 Cuban exiles were supposed to invade, take over key locations, and spark a popular uprising. During the actual invasion, many things went wrong due to poor planning, the fact that Cuba was ready for the invasion, and the lack of local support, and the fact that US air support was limited because they did not want to risk nuclear war. This disaster was a major embarrassment for the US, with it damaging the credibility of the US in Latin America. And another reason this was backfired was because it actually had the opposite effect, with Fidel Castro becoming more powerful as he moved closer to the USSR, and his image as a capable leader was also strengthened. The final reason this was such a disaster was because it eventually led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was the closest that the world has ever come to nuclear war, risking world destruction. Due to the fact that this invasion completely failed while simultaneously damaging the US, causing communism to spread, making Castro more powerful, and also causing the world to almost be destroyed, the Cuban Missile Crisis deserves its ranking as the 10th worst military disaster of the 20th century. The next military blunder that I'll be talking about is the US involvement in Vietnam. This is one of the biggest military disasters of the 20th century for many different reasons. Before the Vietnam War, Vietnam was a French colony. During this time, many Vietnamese people became unhappy with the state of things and rebelled, leading to the creation of the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong was the organization that fought for independence and the creation of communist Vietnam. Due to the Viet Cong fighting for communism, the USSR decided to fund the Viet Cong, and in response the US decided to intervene in an attempt to halt the spread of communism throughout Asia. This war was a failure for the United States, resulting in high casualties, psychological trauma due to the nature of guerrilla warfare, and increased morale and political instability. Moreover, Vietnam became communist despite these high costs. Another major effect this conflict had on America was the creation of anti-war movements, which still impact the public view on war to this day. For these reasons, the U.S. involvement in Vietnam is the ninth worst military blunder of the 20th century. Afghan War. The Soviet-Afghan War is the eighth worst military disaster of the 20th century. The reason why this conflict was such a disaster is because the conflict led to long-lasting repercussions in the Middle East. The conflict started in 1979 when, attempting to install a communist regime and protect their border with Asia, the USSR invaded Afghanistan. Once they invaded, the Afghan people, who did not want Soviet encroachment, created the Mujahideen insurgency. The United States then funded the Mujahideen insurgency in an attempt to force the Soviets out and stop the spread of communism. This conflict led to an estimated 1 million civilian casualties and 90,000 Mujahideen casualties, and 18,000 Afghan deaths, and 14,000 Soviet deaths. This conflict caused the Soviets to withdraw, leading to the decades-long destabilization of Afghanistan and eventual rise of the Taliban. The reason why it earns this place as the eighth worst military disaster of the 20th century is because of the long-lasting issues that it caused that still impact the modern day. This conflict also played a key part in the collapse of the USSR. This is because the Soviet-Afghan War was expensive, which caused economic hardship throughout the crumbling USSR. Another reason is because the defeat led to a huge drop in morale, which also played a key part in the collapse of the USSR. The next blunder on this list is the Italian failure to secure Greece during World War II, and this failure is ranked the seventh worst military disaster because of the humiliating setback it created. The Italian plan was to invade Greece from Albania, then quickly capture major Greek cities by overwhelming the Greek forces. The goal of this plan was to use Greece as a base to threaten British influence in the Mediterranean. Instead, on October 28, 1940, the Greeks fought back, using the mountainous terrain to their advantage. Italian forces were poorly prepared, and the combination of bad weather and poor Italian military leadership allowed the Greeks to push the Italian army back into Albania. This failure then required German intervention. In 1941, Germany was forced to invade Greece and help its ally, which delayed Operation Barbarossa. This complete failure from the Italians led to an increased morale in Greece and a delay that may have cost the Axis powers the entire war. This is why Italy failing to secure Greece deserves its place as the seventh worst military blunder of the 20th century. The next blunder is the Winter War. The Winter War is the sixth the worst military disaster of the 20th century, due in large part to the enormous casualties inflicted on the Soviets. The war began when the USSR attempted to invade outnumbered Finland, deploying 425,000 to 760,000 soldiers, 2,514 tanks to 6,541 tanks, and 3,880 aircraft. Finland's defensive force was made of only 300,000 to 340,000 soldiers, 32 tanks, and 114 aircraft. Despite being severely outmatched, Finland fearlessly defended their territory, causing massive Soviet casualties, including 126,875 to 167,976 dead or missing Soviet soldiers, 188,671 to 207,538 wounded or sick, 5,572 captured, 1,200 to 3,543 tanks being destroyed, and 261 to 515 aircraft being destroyed. Finland, on the other hand, only had 5,904 dead or missing, 43,557 wounded, 800 to 1,100 captured, 20 to 30 tanks destroyed, and 62 aircraft lost. And about 45,792 square kilometers of Finnish territory was ceded to the USSR. Despite the USSR gaining a small amount of territory, this military failure was extremely embarrassing for the USSR, as it was a global superpower considered to have one of the strongest militaries of the world at the time. The next blunder on the list is the sinking of the Lusitania. The sinking of the Lusitania is ranked the fifth worst military disaster of the 20th century because it led to U.S. involvement during World War I. The Lusitania, carrying U.S. citizens, was sunk by a German U-boat because Germany believed it and other British sailing ships were carrying military arms. This sinking caused 128 U.S. citizen casualties and swayed U.S. public opinion, leading to the U.S. joining World War I. When the U.S. joined World War I, it brought with them an extremely strong economy and industrial and military power. Before the war, the U.S. was already supplying allies with weapons, raw materials, and money. The U.S. also caused a turning point in the battlefield due to them bringing fresh troops and supplies. The U.S. also had a strong navy, allowing them to protect convoys from German U-boat attacks. Due to the sinking of the Lusitania causing the U.S. to become involved in World War I, which caused the war to tip in favor of the Allies, it earns its place as the fifth worst military disaster of the 20th century. The next blunder on the list is the Gallipoli operations. The Gallipoli operations are ranked as the fourth worst military blunder of the 20th century. The goal was for the Allies to capture the Dardanelles Strait from the Ottomans, and then advance to Constantinople to force the Ottoman Empire out of World War I. The result of this strategy would provide a supply route to Russia. The naval assault was carried out from February through March of 1915. The naval assault failed because the Entente powers underestimated the Ottoman mines and did poor reconnaissance, leading to inaccurate information on Turkish defenses. Due to this failure, the Entente powers planned a misguided land invasion, where troops would land and storm the high ground before Ottomans had time to react. After securing the peninsula, artillery was supposed to be brought in to support a push towards the Dardanelles fort. The plan failed, with troops landing 2 kilometers away from their target, allowing the Ottoman troops to launch immediate counterattacks. After the initial assault, both sides were locked in a stalemate, where multiple Allied offensives failed. Eventually, the Allied commanders decided to withdraw their forces. This disaster led to the rise of Turkish nationalism, damage to the Allied morale, and a massive loss of life with very little strategic gain. There were around 500,000 casualties without the achievement of any significant military objective. It also strengthened the Ottoman resolve, helping them stay in the war longer than most people expected. Due to the pointless loss of life, and the operation achieving the exact opposite of what it was intended to do, the Gallipoli operations earned its spot as the fourth worst military disaster of the 20th century. The next blunder on the list is the Battle of Dunkirk. The Battle of Dunkirk is ranked the third worst military disaster because it was an embarrassing blunder for the German army. The Battle of Dunkirk was almost a complete defeat for the Allied forces. During this battle, 400,000 Allied troops were trapped in a shrinking area around Dunkirk. The Allied forces were almost completely annihilated, withdrawing all the way back to the beaches of the English Channel. Germany, unthinkably, decided to halt their advance for 48 hours. German leaders believed they had already won the battle, and that the Luftwaffe, or the German Air Force, could finish the destruction of the British Army. These 48 hours give the Allies enough time to plan and organize an evacuation called Operation Dynamo. In Operation Dynamo, the British attempted to rescue as many Allied soldiers as possible across the English Channel. During this operation, Allies not only used military boats, but many civilian boats joined the effort, allowing the Allied army to evacuate safely and permitting Britain to stay in the fight. Although Germans did secure France, they wasted an opportunity to permanently cripple the Allied Western Front by deciding to halt their advance. Because of this, the Battle of Dunkirk is the third biggest military blunder of the 20th century. The next blunder on this list is the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The bombing of Pearl Harbor is the second biggest military blunder of the 20th century. The bombing of Pearl Harbor was a Japanese aerial and naval attack that took place on December 7, 1941. The goal of this attack was to cripple the U.S. Navy. However, the U.S. aircraft carriers were not in port at this time, meaning the main objective of the goal had failed. The true failure of the bombing of Pearl Harbor comes from the short-sighted decision and eventual outcome. Due to this attack, public opinion in the U.S. overwhelmingly shifted towards joining the war, leading to the U.S. involvement in World War II. The U.S.'s entrance into the war put extra strain on the Western European front in Germany and helped cause the collapse of the German military threat in Europe. Another reason why this was so impactful was because the U.S. was the most equipped to go after Japan due to having a strong navy and ocean to protect itself from land-based threats from Germany and Italy. Due to this, the U.S. was able to stop Japan's progress and eventually led to the development and use of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The creation and development of the nuclear bomb led to the Cold War and played an important role in modern-day military defense. Because of this, the bombing of the Pearl Harbor is the second worst military failure of the 20th century. And finally, the biggest military blunder of the 20th century is Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa was a complete failure for a multitude of reasons. Operation Barbarossa was the offensive launched on the USSR in 1941 by the Germans. During this offensive, the Germans swiftly made their way within 18 miles of Moscow, the USSR's capital. While this might sound like a massive success, Hitler decided not to properly supply his troops with winter clothing. Later that year, when a record-breaking winter hit, the Germans were extremely underprepared, becoming mired in the Russian snow. Taking advantage of this, the Soviets, better equipped for the winter, pushed the Germans back to Berlin, crippling the Nazi war effort. Due to the fact that this simple failure to resupply effectively led to the Germans losing World War II, it deserves a place as the worst military disaster of the 20th century.